Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and talk about the first couple sections in Chapter 4 here. And so we're talking about biodiversity here. We brought it up in class a little bit, so let's cover it. First of all, we've talked about biodiversity mostly from the perspective of species. The number and abundance of species that are present in a specific place. That's what the parking lot activity was about finding biodiversity. So that's one form, but diversity comes in lots of different forms. Functional diversity is cycles and systems and processes for moving energy and moving chemicals and stuff like that through ecosystems. And so that kind of diversity is important, and it leads to biological diversity. Genetic diversity. Some creatures are more genetically diverse than others, and so as a result, that plays a factor in there. And of course, ecological diversity. The varieties of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems and all of how they interplay with one another. All of those are factors that affect biodiversity of the planet. What is biodiversity? Here's your working definition, but it has these three main pieces, okay? So they provide us this biodiversity, this variation and abundance of organisms and things on the planet, provide us with a lot of different natural resources, and so some of those listed right here are food, water, wood, energy, and medicines. And so we get things from biodiversity, and we get a variety of things from that world. And so it's important to maintain biodiversity from that perspective, as well as biodiversity provides us with a lot of natural services. It helps purify our water and air, and so it cleans up the environment around us, gives us fertile soil to grow our food from. It gets rid of waste for us, and it controls pests. So all of these things matter. With biodiversity, we get a lot more of all of those items. Moving on, biological evolution. So biological evolution is what provides us with biodiversity. And so we talk about that from the perspective of natural selection, looking at the changes in a population from one generation to the next, and so on and so forth. And so natural selection is what drives biological evolution. And so what is natural selection? Basically, in a nutshell, some individuals in a population are genetically different from another that give them a better opportunity to survive and have babies. And so that's the essence of this whole idea of evolution. The trigger of that is natural selection, simple biological diversity among organisms that makes some better suited for the environment than others. And this eventually leads to the great variety of species that are on the planet. And so how do we know about this evolutionary thing, and how do we understand it? Well, we get our knowledge from lots of locations. We get information about evolution from fossil records, chemical analysis of different things. We drill cores in the Greenland ice sheet and the South Pole, and those ice cores tell us information, as well as DNA analysis. And those are the four main pieces of evidence that we use when we're looking at how things have evolved on our planet. The first one of those is fossil records. So the fossil records give us really good indications of how things are changing over time. But it's important for you to realize that we've found lots of fossils that have helped us have information, but the fossil record is uneven and it's incomplete. So it doesn't tell us the whole story. Scientists have to try to draw conclusions based on that limited data. And the reality is some life on Earth simply don't leave fossils behind. And so it's hard to see what they're doing and how that's affecting the situation if there's no fossil evidence of it. Other fossils decompose a lot easier. So you have to be in the right conditions to have fossils happen. And so that limits them a little bit. And still, we haven't found a lot of fossils that are out there potentially. We're making new fossil discoveries all the time, and so those give us more and more indications of our situation. So fossil record is a good indication of looking at how creatures have evolved over time, but it does have its limitations. But even with all those limitations in mind, this is an important piece of information to have. The theory of evolution has a ton of evidence to support it. It has more evidence to support it than the law of gravity. And so keep in mind, whether you disagree or agree with it is up to you, but keep in mind that there's a lot of evidence out there to support evolutionary ideology. Next, a couple terms for you that you need to know. Put them in the back of your mind. So, first idea before we get into these two terms right here is this part up here that's really important. Okay? Individuals do not evolve. So you can't take a polar bear and evolve it to fit better in a warmer climate. Individuals do not do it. Okay? Populations evolve through successive breeding and generations. And so we got to keep in mind, individuals, no. Populations are what change. Okay? So creatures can evolve, populations can. And the way they do that, first and foremost, is with genetic variability. So the only way an evolution by natural selection can happen is that the population, the organisms, have to have varied genetics. They can't have all the same genetic information. And so there's slightly different genes for whatever it may be. In humans, you see it in eye color and all that kind of stuff. It's slight variations in their ability to fight for mates, or to hear, or to see, or to be camouflaged, or whatever it is, that genetic variation. That genetic variation is caused by mutations. So there's a variety of different mutations, and you learned about them in biology class. But it's basically random genes, when they get copied, will have mutations or shifts or changes in them, and those differences are what we call mutations. And then those mutations can be passed on from one generation to the next. They can be inherited. Next, keep in mind, we need to know that even though evolution doesn't happen on individuals, evolution happens on populations. Natural selection does act on individuals. So natural selection involves individuals. Evolution involves populations. Okay? And the reason why natural selection happens that way is those different genetic mutations that exist in creatures make some creatures better adapted, have a better adaptation to survive and reproduce within their environmental conditions. And when they do that, when their adaptations are successful, and it creates a survival and reproduction system, that will eventually lead to this big fancy statement right here: differential reproduction. Ooh. Which is certain individuals live and leave behind more of their offspring than the other ones. And so we start to see shifts or changes in the genetics. This is all that in a nutshell, and it shows examples of bacteria. Bacteria are interesting because they can actually transfer their genes from one creature to the other. But when environmental conditions change, populations adapt, migrate, or become extinct. Those are the only three choices that happen, and that's the example that's given. So if we were to apply this idea to humans, which our textbook does, why have we become such a powerful species? Well, first of all, we should know what we're missing, what we don't have, and why that would have limited our ability to be a powerful species. We don't have a lot of strength, speed, or agility relative to other large mammals. You know, we're not as strong as apes. We're not as fast as cheetahs. We have limited ability in those three worlds versus other animals. We don't have very many weapons, claws and fangs, and we don't have shells to protect us. We just don't have that kind of battle readiness body. Relatively speaking, we also have pretty poor vision and hearing. So we're not fast, we're not strong, we don't have a lot of weapons to fight with or protect ourselves with, and we can't hear or see things very well, which means we're not very set up for success in nature, you would think, on the surface. But there are a couple things that have really helped us out. First, we have opposable thumbs. Having opposable thumbs gives us the ability to build and work with tools a lot easier. Walking upright. Walking upright has several advantages, from gathering information to seeing predators coming sooner, things along those lines. We have very complex brains, and most of it is in our frontal lobe, giving us the ability to have a lot of good problem-solving skills, which other creatures don't have. And another one that's important, and it's an interesting bit of research that happens within humans in social skills and communication. We are social creatures, and we can communicate with each other extremely effectively relative to other animals. And so as a result, we see that that's a real benefit to us. Look, it doesn't matter where you see it, You see this thing in textbook. One of you guys asked me that in class the other day. Remember, that is flawed. That's a lie. It's not true. It's never been said. Apes to humans. Strange. So, what are some other common misconceptions about natural selection leading to evolution? This one's the common one. We talked about this in class the other day. Survival of the fittest doesn't mean the strongest. It means the best ability to create offspring. That's what it means at the end of the day. Two other ones. Organisms do not develop traits or out of need or want. This is actually a theory that came along for evolution before natural selection came. Giraffes don't get longer necks because they need them to eat. It's a random gene thing. And evolution doesn't have a grand plan or a perfect adaptation that exists. It's just trial and error. It's chance. So those are the three most common misconceptions about natural selection and evolution. Last section, and then we'll shut this bad boy down for the day. So, evolution is affected by other things, though. So geological processes have an impact on evolution. So moving of tectonic plates affect how creatures interact, where they interact, whether they can. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, warming periods, and collisions with asteroids all have evidence to show that they have affected how organisms interact with each other and how they evolve over time. In addition, these processes have been shown to actually be able to wipe out species, to cause extinction, and in other cases, help them to spur forth and help them to evolve, species to evolve and improve. So, species physically move or adapt or form new species through natural selection as a result of these processes. So, good old Pangea back in the day, when it was in this particular situation, we had a lot of things that were built and designed around this idea from a global perspective. One of those is climate. Where land masses are at and how they're laid out affect climate, temperature, rainfall, wind, all of that stuff is affected by that. So as this shifted into this, and then eventually shifted into this, which turned into what we have currently to this day, we've changed the way the continents and the ocean basins are laid out. And as a result, we've changed the climate, both the amount of moisture and temperature in all of those different locations. And the movement of these continents have allowed certain species to move, and it's also isolated other ones, which has led to more evolutionary changes. This picture illustrates that idea a little bit more of where ice was at, where ice was present, where it could stay and where it couldn't stay. And so that has shifted where plants and animals can live. Our distance from the sun also has an impact on that. Actually, just general astronomy does. So we are at the perfect distance between these 2 points, between where the sun's at and where the earth is at. That we're just in the right zone to be at the right temperature to have life on earth. It allows us to have water in all 3 forms: air, as a gas, a liquid, and a solid. The rotation on our axis, the fact we spin, and actually the moon keeps us spinning in a very tight way. If the moon wasn't there, we would wobble way out, and our North Pole would face towards the sun more and melt, and a lot of things would happen. So the way we rotate on our axis really helps with life on this planet. The fact we go around the sun in a synchronized fashion enables us to have our seasons and all of that kind of stuff. And we have just enough gravity, not too much to hold back development of species, but enough that a lot of biological processes happen because of gravity, and it's important. So all of these ideas matter. Thanks for tuning in. We'll move on to the next sections later.